They've always chosen her. Hey everyone, my name's Elena. I'm 23 and, well, let's just say I've always been the supporting cast in the drama of my family's life. My older sister Carly, 28, brilliant, beautiful, and insufferable, is the star. Ever since I can remember, she's been the golden child. You know the type, perfect grades, a picture-perfect marriage to Brad, who's basically her echo chamber, and a self-proclaimed genius when it comes to managing her oh-so-successful restaurant. Carly walks into a room, and the world bends to her. Me. I'm usually the one asked to grab a glass of water for the star of the show. Growing up, Carly's achievements, real or imagined, were celebrated like national holidays. Burnt cupcakes, culinary brilliance. Meanwhile, I could pull off a straight A semester, and the most I'd get was a, "That's nice, Elena." Anyway, did you hear Carly landed another big promotion? But here's the thing. Carly isn't outright awful. She's not an evil stepsister from a fairy tale. She's just Carly, entitled, oblivious, the center of every universe she enters, and I've spent my life trying not to resent her for it. This story starts last summer, when I came home from college for break, utterly exhausted from juggling 2 part-time jobs and a brutal semester. I was hoping for a quiet few weeks at home, maybe a chance to recharge before diving back into my classes. But from the moment I walked through the door, it was clear that quiet wasn't in the cards. Mom greeted me with a distracted hug, already halfway back to the kitchen to tend to something Carly-related, no doubt. Dad gave me his usual half-hearted shoulder pat before disappearing into his study, and then there she was, Carly, breezing in with Brad, trailing behind her like a dutiful shadow. "Hey, little sis," Carly beamed, her perfect smile somehow managing to look both condescending and charming. "Hey, Carly," I muttered, forcing a grin. Dinner that night was a full production. Mom's finest lace tablecloth, steak and roasted veggies, and a homemade dessert. Classic Carly treatment. Meanwhile, when it was just me at home, dinner was usually, "There's leftovers in the fridge." Halfway through the meal, Carly put her fork down with a dramatic flourish. "So," she began, as if preparing for a TED Talk, "Brad and I were thinking, it's been such a stressful year for everyone. What better way to recharge than a family trip to Hawaii for Christmas?" Mom gasped, clasping her hands together in delight. "Oh, Carly, what a wonderful idea." Dad nodded enthusiastically, as though she'd just suggested world peace. And me, I was frozen, mid-bite, trying to process how a family trip was being planned around me. Carly's gaze turned to me, her smile sharpening. "What do you think, Elena? Can you afford it? Or should your big sister cover your share?" Cue the awkward silence. Even Brad stopped chewing. My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice steady. "I can manage, thanks." Carly raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? It's going to be around $5,000 per person. Flights, hotels, activities, it adds up." My stomach sank. $5,000. That was more than my savings and all my earnings combined. I felt like I'd been sucker punched, but I refused to show it. "I can manage," I repeated. "Great," she said with a shrug, already turning back to Mom and Dad to discuss beachfront resorts and helicopter tours, and that's how it started. A Christmas trip to Hawaii that I'd apparently been invited to, just so I could fund part of it for my sister and her husband. As Carly launched into more plans, I sat there quietly, chewing green beans and stewing, wondering if it was too late to back out. But backing out wasn't an option. Not anymore. I was determined to prove that I wasn't the poor kid Carly saw me as, even if it meant draining my savings and eating instant noodles for 6 months. Little did I know, this trip would be the final straw, the moment I'd finally stand up for myself, take back what was mine, and redefine my place in the family. But we'll get to that. For now, all I could think was, this is so typical. After that dinner, I resolved to save every penny I could. If I was going to Hawaii, I wasn't going to let Carly have the satisfaction of thinking she'd funded me. Between shifts at the campus cafe in the mornings and shelving books at the library at night, I scraped together just enough. Every dollar earned was a small victory, even if it came at the cost of sleep and a social life. By late November, I had the money saved. Carly called me one evening, her tone businesslike, as though she were doing me a favor by even including me. "We need to finalize the bookings," she said. "Do you have your share ready?" I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. "Yeah, I'm ready." "Good. Transfer it to me tonight so we can lock everything in." Prices are only going up. Without a second thought, I sent her the $5,000. Watching my account drop to double digits felt like a punch to the gut, but I reassured myself it would be worth it. I wasn't just paying for a trip, I was buying a seat at the table, a chance to prove I wasn't the overlooked sibling Carly thought I was. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a blur of Carly's constant updates, Matching family outfits, snorkeling excursions, and a Christmas luau she had meticulously planned down to the dessert menu. Mom hung on every word, gushing over how thoughtful Carly was, while Dad nodded along like a bobblehead. I tried to stay optimistic, but the closer the trip got, the more uneasy I felt. Something about Carly's tone when she mentioned the trip didn't sit right with me, like she was dangling it over my head. The night before we were supposed to leave, I packed my suitcase, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my chest. But the next morning, I woke up to an atmosphere so tense, it was like everyone was holding their breath. At breakfast, Carly cleared her throat dramatically. "Before we head out, there's something we need to talk about." The room went silent. I set my fork down, already bracing myself. "Well," she started, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Brad and I have been running the numbers, and the trip is costing more than we expected, so we had to make a few adjustments." My stomach twisted. "What kind of adjustments?" Carly glanced at Brad, who nodded like they'd rehearsed this. "We've decided it's best if you don't come with us. Your contribution is helping cover the rest of the costs." The words hit me like a brick. "What?" "It's nothing personal," she added quickly. "It's just that Brad and I never had a proper honeymoon, and this trip is really important for us. You understand, right?" I could barely breathe. "I already paid my share," I said, my voice shaking. "I worked double shifts for months to save for this." Mom chimed in then, her tone overly patient, like she was explaining to a child why they couldn't have dessert. "Elena, you have to understand. Carly and Brad are under a lot of stress with the restaurant. This trip is a chance for them to recharge." "I'm family too," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "How is this fair?" Dad stared into his coffee, avoiding my gaze. Carly shrugged, her expression indifferent. "Life isn't fair, Elena. Besides, someone needs to stay back and watch the house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't just excluding me, they were justifying it like it was a reasonable decision. My money, my time, my effort, it all meant nothing to them. I spent the rest of the day in my room, replaying the conversation over and over. The sound of suitcases being zipped and cheerful chatter outside my door felt like knives twisting in my chest. No one came to check on me. Not Mom, not Dad. Certainly not Carly. By the time they left the next morning, I was numb. Carly flashed me her perfect smile as she climbed into the taxi. "We'll send you pictures so you don't feel too left out," she said with a laugh. I forced a smile and waved as they drove away. But as soon as the taxi disappeared around the corner, I slammed the door shut and stood in the hallway, trembling with anger. I had been walked over for the last time. That's when the idea hit me. If they thought they could treat me like this and get away with it, they were wrong. Very wrong. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house. It was time to take back what was mine. It wasn't until the day after Christmas that the inevitable happened. My phone started buzzing nonstop. First a few texts from Mom asking me to call her, then one from Dad. Rare since he usually left the emotional heavy lifting to her. Finally, Carly chimed in with a string of messages, starting annoyed and quickly escalating to furious. I ignored them all until my phone rang again, Carly's name flashing on the screen. I sighed, bracing myself, and answered. "What the hell is going on, Elena?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Why are all of our things in storage? And why don't our keys work?" I held the phone away from my ear as she continued her tirade, ranting about inconvenience, disrespect, and how I was being so dramatic. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. "Because it's my house," I said, my voice cold, "and you've overstayed your welcome." There was silence on the other end, then a scoff. "Your house? Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is for Brad and me? We just got back from an exhausting trip, and now we're dealing with this? Inconvenient?" I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. "Let's talk about inconvenient, Carly. Like how you stole $5,000 from me for a trip you didn't even let me go on. Or how you've treated my inheritance like your personal vacation home, rent-free. How's that for inconvenient?" "You're blowing this way out of proportion," she said with a laugh that made my blood boil. "It's not like you were ever going to enjoy the trip anyway. We did you a favor." "A favor?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You think stealing from me and excluding me is a favor? You've been walking all over me my entire life, Carly, and I'm done." Carly's tone turned icy. "You know what? Fine. If you want to act like a spoiled brat, go ahead. But don't come crying to us when you realize you can't handle the responsibility of that house on your own. You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, my voice steady now. "But at least I'll regret it on my terms, not because I let you and Brad treat me like a doormat." I hung up before she could respond. Minutes later, Mom called. I hesitated but answered, knowing she wouldn't stop until she got through to me. "Elena," she began, her voice tight with frustration. What were you thinking, throwing Carly and Brad out like that? They're family. Are they? I asked bitterly. Because they sure didn't act like family when they took my money and left me behind. Mom sighed, the sound dripping with exasperation. They didn't take anything. They needed help, and you were in a position to provide it. You should be proud to support your family. Proud? I snapped, my anger boiling over. You want me to be proud of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? Of being used and discarded whenever it's convenient for Carly? Elena, you're being ridiculous, Mom said sharply. Carly and Brad are going through a tough time. They need support right now. So did I shot back, my voice cracking. But no one cared when I was working double shifts, eating ramen, and draining my savings for that trip. No one cared when they kicked me off the trip I paid for, or when they turned Grandpa's house into their personal storage unit. That's enough, Mom said, her tone icy. Fix this, Elena, now. No, I said firmly. For once I'm putting myself first. The house is mine, and they're not coming back. Before she could respond, I hung up and put my phone on silent. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just standing up to Carly. I was standing up for myself. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed endlessly with calls, texts, and notifications from the family group chat. Mom's messages oscillated between guilt-tripping and outright scolding, while Dad's were short, strained requests to fix this mess. Carly, unsurprisingly, was the loudest. Her texts were a mix of outraged all caps and condescending jabs. You're being so immature. You'll regret this. Good luck managing that crumbling old house on your own. I ignored them all, but when my cousin Jessica called, I reluctantly answered. They're losing it, she said, her voice a mix of amusement and pity. Your mom called me this morning, ranting about how you've lost your way. And Carly? Oh, she's telling everyone who'll listen that you've betrayed the family. Sounds about right, I muttered, pacing the living room. You okay? Jessica asked. I hesitated. Was I okay? Honestly, I didn't know. Part of me was still fuming, my mind replaying the confrontation like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. But another part, quieter, steadier, felt lighter, like I'd finally shed a weight I'd been carrying for years. I think I will be, I said finally. That evening, as I sat in Grandpa's old leather chair, the one piece of furniture Carly hadn't dared to replace, I scrolled through the family group chat. The messages had slowed to a trickle, but one caught my eye. Mom, you need to apologize, Elena. Family helps family. You're going to regret burning these bridges. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could feel the old instincts kicking in, the urge to smooth things over, to play the peacemaker, to avoid being the villain in their story. But I couldn't do it, not this time. Instead, I typed a single message. The house is mine, and I've made my decision. If you can't respect that, there's nothing more to say. Then I muted the group chat and set my phone aside. The next morning, I woke up to silence. A rarity in this house, since Carly and Brad had moved in. No blaring TV, no clattering of dishes, no passive-aggressive remarks about my lack of ambition. It was bliss. I spent the day cleaning, reclaiming the space as my own. Carly's gaudy decor had already been packed away, and with each room I tidied, the house felt a little more like Grandpa's again. His fishing rod still stood in the garage. His favorite books still lined the shelves. It wasn't perfect. There was still a leak in the roof, and the paint was peeling in places, but it felt like home. By afternoon, I was exhausted, but oddly at peace. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch swing, letting the cool breeze wash over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't stewing in frustration or biting my tongue to keep the peace. I was just me. That evening, Jessica called again. So, what's next? She asked. I smiled, glancing around the house. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I'm figuring it out. The family didn't take my silence well. Over the next few weeks, Mom called sporadically, her tone shifting from angry to pleading. Carly and Brad are struggling, she said during one conversation. They need support right now, Elena. Don't turn your back on them. I'm not turning my back, I replied calmly. I'm just not letting them walk all over me anymore. You're being selfish, she snapped. No, I said firmly. I'm being fair, for once. Eventually, the calls stopped. Carly blocked me on social media after a particularly passive-aggressive post about fake family loyalty didn't get the reaction she wanted. Dad sent a few more texts, but they were short and impersonal, as if he didn't know what to say. And me, I kept moving forward. I contacted a property management company to help me rent out the house. Within weeks, a young couple had signed the lease. They loved the backyard and promised to take good care of the place. The rent covered the property taxes, and gave me a little extra breathing room financially, something I hadn't had in years. With the house sorted, I started focusing on myself. I reconnected with friends, spent weekends hiking or curled up with a good book, and even splurged on a weekend getaway to a mountain cabin. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. And as I sat by the fireplace in that cozy cabin, sipping hot cocoa and listening to the crackle of the fire, I thought about Grandpa. I could almost hear his voice, warm and reassuring. "You did good, kiddo." For once, I believed it. By the time spring arrived, the chaos my family had stirred up had finally begun to fade into the background. Carly and Brad had officially moved back in with my parents, much to their frustration. According to Jessica, who kept me updated whether I wanted her to or not, Carly had been complaining nonstop about the tiny bedroom and lack of privacy. Brad, true to form, spent his time agreeing with her while hogging the TV. "She's driving your mom nuts," Jessica said during one of our weekly calls. "Honestly, I think your dad's about ready to move into the garage just to escape the drama." I laughed, not out of malice, but because, for once, I wasn't the one carrying the burden of Carly's endless entitlement. Letting go of that responsibility was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. The house on Maple Street was officially rented out by mid-February. The young couple who moved in loved the place, especially the backyard, and promised to preserve its charm. Knowing the house was in good hands gave me a sense of closure, like I was honoring Grandpa's memory in a way my family never had. With the rent covering property taxes and leaving me with a bit extra, I finally had the financial breathing room I'd always dreamed of. I paid off some lingering bills, replaced my worn-out shoes, and even treated myself to a spa day, a luxury I'd never dared to indulge in before. More than anything, I found joy in the small things: cooking in my quiet apartment, taking long walks in the park, and reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from. For years, I'd been so consumed by my family's demands and Carly's shadow that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost. Now, I was rediscovering who I was outside of their expectations. One day, as I was organizing my bookshelf, I came across a photo of Grandpa and me sitting on the porch swing at the house. He was mid-laugh, his arm draped around my shoulders, and I was grinning ear to ear. Looking at that picture, I felt a rush of gratitude for him, for his belief in me, and for the courage I'd finally found to stand up for myself. "You did good, kiddo," I imagined him saying, just as he always had. And he was right. Months later, I received a surprising email from my mother. The tone was softer, almost hesitant. "Elena, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I didn't handle things the way I should have, and I'm sorry if I made you feel like you didn't matter. You've always been important to us, even if I didn't show it." I stared at the email for a long time, conflicted. Part of me wanted to delete it, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to build, but another part of me, a quieter, more forgiving part, felt something else. Not reconciliation exactly, but the possibility of it. For now, I didn't reply. Maybe someday I would. But today, I was focused on living the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim. I spent that evening with friends, laughing over wine and takeout, feeling lighter than I had in years. As I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, I realized something important. Standing up for myself hadn't just changed my relationship with my family, it had changed how I saw myself. I wasn't the forgotten sibling anymore. I wasn't the quiet, accommodating girl who let people take advantage of her. I was Elena, strong, capable, and finally free. The conflict with my family wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a life where I got to be the main character. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Story 2. Looking back, it all started when I was 17. My parents, ever the picture of amicable separation, sat me down in our cramped living room and calmly announced their impending divorce. No dramatic outbursts, no accusations, just a quiet acknowledgement that they'd grown apart. I remember feeling strangely detached, maybe because their composure was contagious, or maybe because deep down, I'd already sensed it coming. The subtle signs were all there: the dwindling family dinners, the parallel lives they led under one roof. Dad moved into a decent apartment across town, and my weekends with him became a comforting constant. We'd order pizza, watch cheesy sci-fi flicks, our usual routine. But then, barely a year later, Mom dropped a bombshell over breakfast. "Anna," she chirped, practically radiating excitement. "I've met someone special. He has a daughter around 10. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a sister?" I forced a smile, pushing my cereal around my bowl. "Great, Mom. Really great," I mumbled, the enthusiasm failing to reach my eyes. Within months, they were married. Mark, the someone special, and his daughter Chloe moved into our house. And that's when the real trouble began. Chloe, with her designer wardrobe and perfectly coiffed blonde curls, was an angel in front of the adults. But the moment their backs were turned, she transformed. It started small, my favorite sweater, accidentally, bleached in the wash, my homework mysteriously acquiring coffee stains. Mark wasn't much better, always lurking with a thinly veiled insult. Anna, isn't that skirt a little short for school? Or, maybe if you spent less time on your phone and more time studying, your grades would improve. I tried talking to Mom, but she'd brush it off. He's just protective, honey. He wants what's best for you. Then came the research project incident. I'd poured weeks into it. Interviews, data analysis, the works. I came home early one afternoon to find Chloe in my room, her hands stained green from the markers she'd used to deface my work. Pages and pages of research, ruined. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing her by the collar of her ridiculously expensive cardigan. "Nothing," she squealed, but the evidence was all over her hands. I dragged her downstairs, where Mom and Mark were glued to the TV. "Look at her hands," I yelled, pointing at the green stains. "Look what she did to my research project." Mark jumped up, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Get your hands off my daughter," he roared. "She destroyed my work. Weeks of work." "You little fool," Mark snarled, stepping towards me. "How dare you manhandle my Chloe? She's just a child." I looked at Mom, pleading with my eyes for her to intervene, to say something, anything, but she just sat there, shaking her head at me as if I was the one in the wrong. That night, sleep was a distant dream. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Mom's silence over and over in my head. By morning, my decision was made. Before the sun even peeked over the horizon, I was packing. Clothes, books, anything I could grab. I didn't even bother folding them. I dialed Dad's number, and he picked up on the first ring. "Anna, what's wrong?" My voice cracked as I choked out the words. "Can I come live with you? Please?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Dad's truck pulled up, Mark was already at work, and Chloe was thankfully at school. Mom stood in the doorway, watching me load my bags. "Anna, don't do this," she pleaded. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I turned to face her, my voice shaking with anger. "Your husband called me a fool, and you just sat there. Your stepdaughter destroyed my work, and you did nothing." Dad must have heard, because his face hardened. "What's this about Mark calling my daughter names?" After I told him everything, he was livid. He marched straight to Mark's workplace. I stayed in the truck, but I could see them through the office window. Dad pointing, Mark standing up, faces red, fingers jabbing. Security had to pull them apart before punches were thrown. Living with Dad was like escaping a suffocating cage. No more tiptoeing around. No more constant fear of sabotage. He even helped me redo my research project, staying up late with me, bringing me coffee and snacks. A few days later, Mom sent me a message. "I can't believe you set your father against Mark like this. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't bother responding. What family? The one where her husband verbally abused me? Where her stepdaughter destroyed my belongings? I focused on finishing my senior year strong. When graduation came around, Dad and Grandma were in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Mom was there too, with Mark and Chloe, but I barely acknowledged their presence as I walked across the stage. "We're so proud of you, sweetie," Grandma said, hugging me tight. "And we've got a surprise. Your father and I have been saving for your college fund." They'd saved enough to cover my tuition at the local college. That fall, I moved into the dorms, ready for a fresh start. A few months into my sophomore year, Mom reached out on social media. "I'm sorry about everything that happened. Can we talk?" I agreed to meet her at a cafe near campus. It was awkward at first, both of us stirring our coffee, avoiding eye contact. "Chloe's starting to look at colleges," she said. And then, "Mark just got a new car." "That's nice," I replied, quickly changing the subject. "My psychology professor thinks I should consider grad school." We settled into a fragile routine after that. Monthly coffee meetings where we talked about safe topics, the weather, my classes, her work. She'd try to slip in mentions of Mark and Chloe, but I'd steer the conversation away. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. After graduation, I landed a job at Marshall & Associates as a junior project manager. Dad was thrilled and immediately offered me a room at his place. "You could save money, Anna," he said over dinner. "No need to rush into renting." I shook my head, pushing my pasta around my plate. "Thanks, Dad, but I need to do this on my own. It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet." I found a small apartment near work. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That first night, sitting on my secondhand couch with takeout Chinese, I felt a sense of accomplishment I'd never known before. Every month, I diligently squirreled away a chunk of my paycheck into my future house fund. While my coworkers splurged on expensive lunches, I brought sandwiches from home. When they hit the bars after work, I stayed late, tackling the projects nobody else wanted. Parker, the client. Impossible, my colleague Jake warned when I volunteered for the Riverside account. They've gone through 3 project managers already. I just smiled. Watch me. 3 months later, the Riverside project was completed ahead of schedule. My boss called me into his office. Impressed. Anna, you've exceeded all expectations, he said, sliding a bonus check across his desk. Keep this up, and you're going places in this company. The quarterly bonuses started rolling in, and they weren't small. Every cent went straight into my savings. My coworkers thought I was crazy, passing up happy hours and weekend trips. You're wasting your youth, Mom said during one of our coffee meetings. You should enjoy life a little. I am enjoying life, I replied. I'm building my future. She stirred her coffee absently. Chloe's joined a sorority at her college, having the time of her life. I changed the subject. The only times I couldn't avoid Mark and Chloe were family gatherings. Thanksgiving at Aunt Paula's, Christmas at Uncle Mike's. I'd walk in, hug Mom, and pretend they didn't exist. Chloe, now in college herself, would shoot me smug looks. She'd grown taller, more polished, but that mean streak was still there, just better hidden. Mark would stand with his arms crossed, looking down his nose at me. Still at that entry-level job? He'd say, loud enough for others to hear, even though he knew I'd been promoted twice. During one Thanksgiving, Mom cornered me by the refrigerator while I was helping Aunt Paula in the kitchen. Anna, don't you think this has gone on long enough? She sighed. Chloe's grown up now. Mark's mellowed. Can't we just be a family? I closed the fridge door a little harder than necessary. We're not a family, Mom. We're people who happen to be connected by your marriage. That's it. You're being childish, she said, shaking her head. People grow. People change. Yeah, they do, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. I've grown enough to know I don't need toxic people in my life, even if they're technically family. She opened her mouth to argue, then just shook her head and walked away. Same old Mom, always choosing the path of least resistance, always walking away from confrontation. But every snide comment from Mark, every smug look from Chloe, just reinforced that I'd made the right choice in keeping my distance. The day I turned 28, I signed the final papers on my house. After years of saving and working overtime, I'd managed to put down 60% of the total cost. The mortgage payments wouldn't keep me up at night. Congratulations, Miss Parker, the realtor said, handing me the keys. It's a beautiful property. Standing in my empty living room that first day, I felt like I could finally breathe. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with granite countertops, and a backyard where I could plant a garden. All mine. I planned a housewarming party, sending invitations to family and close friends. Dad and Grandma couldn't make it. They'd recently moved to Hawaii for Dad's retirement. When I called Mom to invite her, I was specific. I'd love for you to come, Mom. Just you. She hesitated. Anna, that's not fair to Mark and Chloe. Mom, I said firmly. It's my house, my rules. She agreed, but I should have known better. The day of the party, I opened the door to find Mom standing there with Mark and Chloe in tow. Surprise, Mom said weakly, noting my expression. I bit my tongue and let them in. Mark's eyes scanned everything, his lips curling slightly as he took in the crown molding and hardwood floors. It's nice, he said, making it sound like anything but. Chloe, now 22, and dressed like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, wandered around with her nose in the air. The kitchen's kind of small, isn't it? I was showing my colleague Jake the back patio when I overheard Chloe talking to Mom and Mark in the living room. Daddy, I've been looking at houses too, she said, loud enough to carry. I'm going to get one much bigger than this, with a pool. I couldn't help myself. I walked back inside. Really? That's interesting. What job are you planning to buy it with? Chloe's face flushed. I have prospects. Prospects aren't paychecks, I said. And last I heard you were still living off your dad's credit card. Mark's face turned that familiar shade of purple. How dare you? No, how dare you? I cut him off. You show up uninvited to my house and then stand there insulting it. Anna! Mom grabbed Mark's arm as he took a step forward. Come on, Mark. Chloe, we're leaving. I watched them hurry out, Mom shooting me an apologetic look over her shoulder. The door closed behind them, and the party continued.